Hello and welcome back to the Existential Lounge. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different than our normal episodes. Donald Trump was just elected as president, and within this election, and we felt that it was important to talk about current events, things that are happening, things that are transpiring in modern day that have large influence on society. And so this is going to be a bit of a shorter episode, just touching on what happened and our thoughts on things.
Yeah, these are not going to take the place of our regular episodes. These won't be part of the podcast itself. They're more of side episodes. Whenever something comes up that we think is worth talking about, we're going to get that right into it.
Yeah.
So, first, we like to say that we think there's an issue with how politics are usually spoken about in the media, in both mainstream media and all the like people on YouTube, the pundits who speak about it. It seems to be a super divisive topic. No matter how they try to do it, it's always a us versus them. There's never a middle ground where things usually exist. Nothing really exists in that black and white. Most things exist on that gray, and it seems that we don't get that. And we like to have just that discourse of ideas. Myself, I consider myself to be uh, independent, somewhere in the middle that
Likewise.
is socially liberal but economically a little more conservative. And like so many people, I feel like there's no place for me in the political world.
Yeah,
I,
it makes sense because anytime you're going on some media platform that it's either very right or very left, and I feel like I'm speaking for a lot of Americans where we just kind of want a more neutral kind of place, somewhere where we can look at the ideas of the left or look at the ideas on the right and like recognize that there's legitimacies on both sides
right.
and engage in this reasonably. And it's a bit intense because it's become such a polarized topic and people are so quick to leap down each other's throats and you have like one particular
Right. And
perspective and
I
go
think,
ahead.
in large part, with our background in philosophy, it's almost just alienating to us to have anything that where an idea is unspeakable or unthinkable.
Yeah.
It's such an off-putting stance to have that I can't find myself identifying with either political party for that reason, because I can't exist in a place that says you're not allowed to say that. But why?
Yeah.
Why can't I explore these ideas? Why is it not okay to look at what the other side of the table is talking about and say, maybe you're making some sense?
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that's one of the largest reasons why the social circle and our political system is as flawed as it is right now. I think that like the inability of politicians to be able to do that, as well as just
Right.
people in society, is creating a lot of like harm and
It is.
a lot of separation
It
amongst us
seems
as
like
well.
divisiveness is almost their goal, as opposed to passing any legislation or making any policies to actually create substantial change. It seems like they're out there deliberately causing division within the electorate.
Yeah.
So we want to dive in first into just looking at the election itself. How did things turn out? I have the numbers pulled up here. This, for some reason, Arizona is still the only state that hasn't declared its electorate,
Wow.
but it obviously doesn't matter. Um, Trump surprisingly won somehow, both with the Electoral College and the popular vote. He's sitting right now at 301 electorates to Kamala Harris's 226, and at 50.5% of the total votes compared to Kamala's 47.9.
Yeah.
It's a outcome that I didn't really see coming. I thought, if I'm being honest, I thought Kamala Harris would win this election, but in a scenario where Donald Trump won it, I thought for sure it would be the Electoral College by a slim margin and she'd still win the popular vote. But no, we saw an almost unprecedented flip by the American people.
Yeah, definitely. I think what, from my personal perspective on my surprise, comes from, I think a lot of the media and especially really like, celebrities seem to have endorsed Kamala like heavily
Yeah,
across the boards from what I
Taylor
saw.
Swift, Beyonce,
Yeah,
the Avengers.
the whole event. Yeah. Um, and I didn't really see as much for Donald Trump. And I mean, Kamala was on like what was it called, Fortnite. Even
Right.
they had like some event for her as well, which I think is very controversial and questionable. But
But I think that that's speaks to how far removed this elite celebrity class really is from the people. Because when we're looking at, oh, Taylor Swift endorsed her, Beyonce endorsed her, Jay-Z endorsed her, all these people endorsed her, but then we're looking at how the numbers turned out. He swept on the swing states.
Yeah.
One Georgia, one Pennsylvania, one Michigan, and we're not talking by small margins. 50.7% of the votes in Georgia. We're looking at 50.6 in Pennsylvania, and the closest one, 49.7 to 48.3 in Michigan. And those are states that were expected by all the polls that we saw before the election to go to Kamala. We're even looking at Minnesota, which she won by a slim margin. And that's where Waltz is. Her VP choice was the governor there. And it's expected that she would win that handily, but she didn't. And it's just a surprise how that all turned out. Then we look at more specific numbers. We see that Manhattan had more Republican votes since the election in 1992. It's expected usually that these bigger cities tend to lean left, and they still did. Manhattan was by far blue, but it had more Republican votes than since 1992. That's an insane shift. We're looking at the Bronx and Queens having actually gone red with Latino males. And we got to talk about, that's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's area. That's her district, which she did get reelected. Let's still point that out. All the people there still reelected AOC to go back to Senate. But it's insane that after that joke that was made by that comedian at Trump's rally, an area that is so predominantly Puerto Rican still voted for him.
Yeah, I think that's extremely telling. It's in a way almost like unprecedented seeming regarding how a lot of the base that she was trying so hard to gain support from seemed to turn their backs on her.
Yeah.
Not only that, but as you touched on previously with, mostly predominantly left-leaning states, they switched up in many ways. And
she lost the vote of the Latino man. She lost the vote of the suburban white woman. All of these went to Donald Trump this time around, things that were never been expected.
Yeah, I think something that's super surprising is people that fall into the minority groups, they, from what I've heard, is that they just felt that she was trying way too hard to be connective with them, and kind of like she was just trying too hard to be relative. In a way that wasn't coming off authentically. And I think a lot of people distance themselves because of that.
Definitely. I think just to dive back into those numbers that we were looking at, he won rural areas, which is expected. Those tend to be red. Rural areas are usually red. Big inner cities are usually blue. But the numbers that he won the rural areas by is crazy. He dominated everything in those areas. She essentially won none of them. We look at Pennsylvania, to bring it back there, one of those swing states, if I'm not mistaken. She won Philadelphia, Pittsburgh. Those are the big cities in Philadelphia. She still lost the state. And that's because virtually every single other county was red. She just won Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. It's just staggering, the numbers that we see, and that's true for all these other blue states as well. We look at New York, which had a shift of plus 23 Democrat in 2020 to only plus 12. We look at New Jersey going from plus 16 Democratic to plus 4. Rhode Island plus 23 to only plus 13. Connecticut going from plus 20 to only plus 8. It's just outstanding, these numbers, how these are all 10 plus point shifts to the Republican side, something that nobody really expected.
And that unprecedented shift in Starr County, Texas, where predominantly there's the most Latino.
Not only predominantly, the most Latino county in the country. 97% of that population is registered Latino in the census. 97%. Now, not only, let's keep adding to that, they're close to the border. So we're talking Texas, close to the border. You would think that they would 100% lean blue. They were red for the first time since 1892.
That's unbelievable.
That's beyond unbelievable.
especially in many of the ways Donald Trump kind of presents himself to be like very strict with policy pertaining to immigrants and illegal immigrants specifically,
Hmm.
and his emphasis on closing the border. Um, you know, it's impressive to see this huge shift in a way
Yeah,
that we haven't really seen before.
yeah, shift that wasn't expected by any of the polls that we were seeing. It wasn't expected by any of these political pundits. We all thought that after that joke, he essentially had killed his campaign by alienating the Latino vote, but it turned out that the Latino vote made the difference in the opposite way.
I think what's also interesting is I expected some sort of shift based off of his Hitler comments as well. Saying that he needs more generals and people under him that worked in the same way that like
Hmm.
Hitler's advisors did. I think that you know minorities were also targeted during that time, and it's interesting to like
Yeah,
kind of
interesting to see the
support.
shift in
Yeah,
political support.
for sure.
Um, so, just to, how did we end up getting to the point where all these people that are traditionally blue voting ended up voting for Donald Trump?
Yeah,
I think it's in large part what is being dubbed the Bernie to Trump pipeline. So that scorned voter that feels the Democratic Party has done them so poorly and were supporters of Bernie Sanders in the 2016 primaries and in the 2020 primaries, and then they end up feeling like the Democratic Party abandoned them
hmm,
and almost turned to Donald Trump as a spite vote, telling the
yeah.
Democratic Party, I'm not going to vote for whatever figurehead you put up there anymore. I'm just not going to do it. And before we get into more of that, I want to read Bernie Sanders' statement on the election results, which
Absolutely.
I think speaks even more to what I was just saying. Senator Sanders says, it should come as no surprise that a Democratic Party which has abandoned the working class people would find that the working class has abandoned them. First, it was the white working class, now it is the Latino and black working as well. While the Democratic leadership defends the status quo, the American people are angry and want change, and they're right. Today, while the very rich are doing phenomenally well, 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, and we have more income and wealth inequality than ever before. Unbelievably so, with inflation accounted for, weekly wages for the average American worker are actually lower than they were 50 years ago.
Yeah.
That is out. I just don't even know what to say. It leaves me without words. That somehow our workers today, when adjusted for inflation, are earning less than workers did 50 years ago.
I think that's a large reason why so many young people are rebelling in many ways and feeling like,
one Hundred
I
percent.
mean, we, speaking on behalf of our own experiences, we're college graduates and working non entry level jobs, and we are barely able to make ends meet.
Yeah,
Like this is barely like livable wage, even. That's like
and he
insane.
touches on that right on the next paragraph. He says, today, despite an explosion in technology and worker productivity, many young people will have a worse standard of living than their parents.
Yeah.
And many of them worry that artificial intelligence and robotics will make a bad situation even worse.
Absolutely. I mean, I've spoken to you about my friend who has worked in the advertising agency, and literally one of his jobs was completely taken over by artificial intelligence. And
And
we're in support of AI, but I
100%.
don't think that we are in a position right now where we are adjusting to how quickly that technology is progressing and influencing our lives. It's going to take a lot of time to adapt to that.
100%. And I want to point out too that this, because the argument to this is, oh, this generation is lazy, this generation doesn't like to work as hard.
100%.
This friend you're talking about is an individual who has
Yeah.
a master's degree in the field, and is still being replaced by AI.
Yeah.
How much harder do you want us to work?
Yeah.
So,
Oh, also was underpaid at that job as well. Just to point that as well.
yeah.
Insane. If that wasn't enough.
But I'll keep going. Today, despite spending far more per capita than other countries, we remain the only wealthy nation not to guarantee healthcare as a human right, and we pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. We alone, among major countries, cannot even guarantee paid family and medical leave.
Yeah, we're in a country where if you get hurt, you're better off walking it off than like getting medical help, because you are going to be in so much debt if you do.
100%.
And on top of the cost of living already being insane, like getting hurt, getting sick is an inevitability,
Yes.
but like if that happens to you on top of already it being so difficult to make ends meet, you are going to be in such a hole. Like it seems it seems awful to live in such a way where you have to be fearful to get hurt, not because of the pain or anything that comes with it, but because of the financial cost that's going to burden both you and your family
Yeah.
as a result.
So, and I'll keep going with his statement. He says, today, despite strong opposition from a majority of Americans, we continue to spend billions funding the extremist Netanyahu government's all out war against the Palestinian people, which has led to the horrific humanitarian disaster of mass malnutrition and the starvation of thousands of children. While the big money interests and well paid consultants who control the Democratic Party learn any lessons from this disastrous campaign. So I think this is the Bernie of old. So this is the Bernie of 2016 that was calling out the establishment, and I
Yeah.
love to hear stuff like that. The will the big money interests and well-paid consultants who control the Democratic Party, it's saying that secret out loud, the one that everybody knows but we don't really talk about, that the party's controlled by these donors, by the big
Yeah.
lobbyists who are giving all these individuals the money. We're talking big pharma, we're talking ExxonMobil, all these different things that are just giving money and giving money to politicians, and that curates into what they're writing in legislation. And Bernie Sanders is pointing out that we've had enough of that.
Yeah.
And it's time the Democratic Party wakes up and sees that. It sees that the people don't want to keep voting for these puppets.
Yeah, you can only dangle a carrot over someone's head so long until they just lose it.
Yeah,
And that's definitely what's happened.
I think the best way to put it is that the Democratic Party has become the party of false promises. It's become the party of, I say what you want me to hear, but I don't deliver once you put me in office. And eventually the people are going to say, well, I won't put you in office anymore.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. It's unfortunate that it's come to a degree like this.
Yeah, and he goes on to in his next sentence, he says, will they understand the pain and political alienation that tens of millions of Americans are experiencing? Do they have any ideas as to how we can take on the increasingly powerful oligarchy, which has so much economic and political power? Probably not. And he ends a statement there. It's just, it really just lights a fire in me. It angers me to see that this isn't a mystery. This isn't.
Yeah, I think you brought something up the other day regarding how Kamala was on, what was that show, The View, I think it was,
Yes.
and they asked her, how are you going to differentiate yourself from Biden, and she didn't even have an answer. I
She
think
didn't.
that is so indicative of that establishment sort of stance and that
Curated answers.
exactly, where you're not different. And
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, after they asked her that, she goes on to tell them about how she was born and raised in middle class.
yeah,
What? That's not an answer.
no, and
That's
I
just
think
saying more of those pretty words that you think people are gonna like, oh, she's middle class just like me.
fully, and I think something that also is a added piece of evidence to that curated response type of deal is, the whole Joe Rogan situation.
Yeah.
She denied going onto the show, I believe it was,
Yep.
or she had particular standards that
So,
how did that go?
Joe Rogan said he invited her and he wanted her on the show to speak to her as a person, get to know who she is as a human being.
Yeah.
He even said that if there's particular questions that they don't want to answer, or I'm sorry, that they don't want to be asked, he won't ask them. He's
Yeah.
not there even to necessarily speak about policies. He wanted to get to know her as a human because it seems that no public speaking she ever does is human.
Yeah.
And her campaign managers started putting a bunch of stipulations that it couldn't be over an hour. He'd have to fly out to her. She wouldn't go to the Austin, Texas studio to record. She was out in Pennsylvania or something at the time doing rallies, and he had to fly out to her again, specific amount of time. So when Donald Trump recorded, what was it, like 3.5 hours? She can only do 1 hour. And they were nonsense stipulations put in place just so to essentially to get the no.
Yeah.
Complicated to the point where it's just not possible.
Yeah.
It seems so
By design.
Yeah.
I think the thing that's frustrating also is podcasting is such a wonderful way that I think younger generations and even older generations are becoming privy to realizing, like, this is such a fantastic and authentic way to get to know someone and
Yeah.
how they think and who they are. Like having a 3 hour long unedited just conversation of just discourse and in a relaxed setting.
Yeah.
like news is so different where there's already pre-practiced questions and all this like formality
Hmm.
business that goes on, and
You could tell a
text.
screen behind the
Yeah,
camera they're
it's so much
reading.
more showy, and it loses a sense of authenticity, which I think is one of the, if not what we're arguing, is the biggest thing missing right now from politics
Yeah,
is
it's the
saying what you mean,
authenticity.
and being an actual
And
human.
I think for better or worse, that's what gravitates so many people towards Donald Trump is that he will say what's on his mind.
Yeah.
Be it good, be it bad, he will say what's on its mind. And I think I know him more as a human than I know Kamala Harris, that I know Joe Biden, that I knew Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
I don't know them. I know what their campaign managers want them to say,
Yeah.
but with him, again, for better or worse, I know who he is.
Yeah.
And people are attracted to that level of authenticity.
Yeah, he's literally infamous for going against like the scripts or whatever he's like told not to say. He'll say it anyways, and
Anti-establishment.
yeah.
I think that's the
Hmm.
exact word we're looking for here. He's not establishment. And after the Bush and Obama era, people started getting tired of the establishment. People didn't want establishment politicians anymore. They didn't want the people who had answers that seemed like they had to go through 50 rounds of clearing before they could say it.
Yeah.
They didn't want any of that anymore. And around that same period, we had two politicians, one on each side of the aisle, that started coming up who were essentially populists. We had the conservative populist, Donald Trump, and we had the liberal populist in Bernie Sanders.
Hmm.
And it seems that the Republicans saw that wave coming. They saw the wave of people want populist. People want the guy who will go up there and be authentic as possible. And they leaned heavy into it and they gave Donald Trump that nomination in 2016.
Yeah.
The Democrats, they did the opposite. They kept pushing out their establishment candidates and essentially pushed Bernie in a closet and said, "You're not going to come out of there unless we say it's okay."
Yeah.
And we saw that in the first time he ran for the nomination in the primaries back in 2016. They ended up giving it to Hillary. And then we saw in 2020 where Biden was essentially dead in the water. And then we saw Cory Booker, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg all drop out in the matter of one weekend, endorse him, and all of a sudden Joe Biden is jumped Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
If we're not, we can't sit here and say that wasn't deliberate.
Yeah.
Because we also look at all of what happened afterwards. She gets his vice president pick. Pete Buttigieg is like the something with transportation. It seems like some calls were made. Drop out, endorse me. You'll get this comfy spot once I get elected.
Yeah, I think something that was so attractive to a lot of people, at least in my like own experience from the things that I've heard, was people found it so refreshing that Donald Trump wasn't some traditional politician, that he
Yeah.
was some businessman, that he was some person that people looked at as like, oh, you're this multi-billionaire who's like super successful, and you've had your shows, you've had your businesses, you've had all these sorts of things. Let's see if America could be run that way. Let's see
Yeah.
what you could do. You just shoot from the hip when you speak, and you go against the grain in many ways. And I think a lot of people are just missing that, this less showy disposition, and just being more raw and authentic. And again, to emphasize, for better for worse, I think a lot of ways it's rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, but it's also had a way of really
Clearly,
firing up a
people.
lot of others, for sure.
Yeah. We touched earlier on how she just refused to differentiate herself from Biden. So it seemed like even though the incumbent dropped out, Joe Biden, it seemed like this would just be another 4 years of the same.
Yeah.
And she should have done a better job. Her campaign should have done a better job of making her stand out, be different than him, but they just didn't. Because in reality, neither of them are very different. Neither of them hold many ideology. There's no level of, there's nothing there that they're actually believe in. It's just, what is the next talking point that whoever is sending me to say?
Yeah.
And it's just become so like rinse and repeat that the Democratic
Correct. I
Party,
think that's a good way of putting it.
yeah, and the Democratic Party or the electorate lost their hope, their belief in this party. Um, it seemed like everything that they were doing, their biggest talking point when being on stage is, "I'm not Donald Trump."
Yeah.
That anti-Trump campaign.
I can't tell you how many times I was frustrated when I genuinely wanted to hear more about her policies, more about what are you about, what kind of changes do you want to implement. And everything was just like, we just can't like let him back into office.
Yeah,
Like we can't have that.
fascist, this, that,
Yeah.
dictator, we'll never have another election, blah, blah, blah. These like calls for mass hysteria.
Mhm.
Essentially, you're telling us I'm not good enough to vote for. I'm just not as bad as that guy.
Yeah.
That how do you hope to galvanize people that way?
Yeah.
You're not giving me a reason to vote for you. You're just saying I might be a better option than the other option.
Yeah.
That's not how you run a campaign. And
All while not differentiating yourself from who previously held office, which everyone, I mean, I don't know anyone that like applauded Biden for really much at all of what he did. I don't think that he was in a mental state to be able to be president. And
the decline was so evident. Yeah.
yeah, and I think to like not differentiate yourself, that is such a massive telling thing that is detrimental to you to not be able to do.
Yeah, extremely. You touched earlier about the whole Joe Rogan podcast, but I want to expand it even more from there, where it seems like she refused to go on podcasts in general. I think the only thing I saw her on was Shannon Sharp's podcast.
Hmm.
While Donald Trump, he went out there, he went on Rogan, on Andrew Schultz, Theo Vaughn, Aiden Ross,
Yeah.
all these different people who have large audiences. And if you're telling me that that didn't sway some votes, what is the views? It was like 40 million in the first 3 days for the Joe
Yeah,
Rogan episode.
it was big,
Theo
huge.
Vaughn, Andrew Schultz both got big views on those. You're telling me that didn't sway votes?
Pretty sure he's also like Nelk Boys or something.
He was on Nelk Boys as well, yeah. I don't know what they were thinking in the running her campaign, telling her no, don't go on these shows.
Yeah, like on one hand, you want to be relevant on Fortnite, but you're not gonna like go on podcasts, which have blown up in
They're
popularity
the
as
new
of late.
form of people receiving information on current events. That's
Yeah.
just the way that it is because so many people have lost their belief in the corporate media that seems to be curated to one party or the other.
I think that that's just unbelievably telling. With like, I mean, if you look at Fortnite, you're just gonna see like her name. You see like little
Yeah.
rainbow fireworks or whatever of like her just image and all. I think that the difference in how deep both of those go, speaking on a podcast
Mhm.
versus let me just throw myself on some game, it says everything about your desire and willingness to go deep and expand about who you are and what you're about and what you want to do. It seems so shallow and cheap to just do this like quick thing to throw into some game versus
Yeah.
literally going on podcast after like I applaud Trump for like having that approach where that is such a deep way to connect. I mean, millions upon millions watched collectively all of those episodes that he was on.
So many.
Yeah, and that's a way to really connect. I think that that's what all politicians, I think that should be setting a standard for a way to connect to communities because
Yeah, it's the new wave of how campaigns are going to be ran going forward.
yeah.
I remember it started back in 2016, back when Joe Rogan had Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard, Andrew Yang, all these different people were on his podcast. That was like the beginning of, guys, this is the future of how political campaigns need to be ran. That we need to have people on these platforms because these platforms have so many viewers.
Yeah.
And to just not be on there, to refuse to go on there, seems to be just such a missed opportunity, to say the least.
Yeah, I don't know too many people, younger generations that are watching the news. I feel like that's something almost older era kind of
Yeah.
approaching to gaining knowledge about current events and what's going on. I mean, I think people nowadays mostly lean into like Reddit and podcasting, as we said, and so to like miss out on that opportunity, you're shooting yourself in the foot and
Yeah.
in both feet, honestly.
Definitely. So now we're here. He won. He is the president-elect. What happens now? So we're looking at Israel-Palestine. Been some good news since then. First 48 hours, he was president-elect. Hamas has said that they want to stop the war immediately. There's some stipulations there. We'll see. Hopefully, those negotiations go well between whatever representative of Hamas and Netanyahu.
Yeah.
Russia, Ukraine.
Similar outcomes happening right now.
Yeah, the reports are that Donald Trump has spoken with Vladimir Putin and some agreement is being come to. And
I'm curious about that. I would, I think that like just to immediately stop once you get in office, I think that there is some sort of give and take relationship
well,
that's
of course,
required to, yeah, to
yeah,
make something like that happen. I'd be curious to see the sort of elements at play in what's making that so
we'll see them
possible.
soon.
Yeah, hopefully that'd be really interesting and enlightening to like
But
see
regardless, the fact that he's able to
that
bring
that
something
influence right now
already,
for sure.
and again, not even being in office, he's just president elect. He won't be in office until January of next year.
Yeah,
Um, what what else can we call the Democratic Party but inept?
yeah,
When in 4 years you guys weren't able to do anything but continue to send weapons over there, and within 48 hours of him being elected, not even in office, just elected, tensions are already going down.
yeah.
Um, something needs to be said there. Something exists there. What's going on? Are you guys not trying? Are you just are you trying and not able? Are you just not trying at all?
Yeah. I think what's also interesting is when that announcement was made, I was like doing research and I couldn't find any left wing media sources that were like
That's
covering that, which I think is damning in many ways. I think it's important that that coverage is had, especially
that's
something of that magnitude. I think that's unbelievable to like not
that's the
cover that.
reason that you were saying earlier that so many people have moved away from watching mainstream media, and it's because stuff like that,
Yeah.
where we know that whatever network we're watching is automatically curated to one political party, as opposed to reporting news. They report on talking points, they report on things that they think will help their political party, not just trying to inform the public of what's going on in the real world.
Yeah.
And that's why I think so many people have moved away from it. Something I wanted to touch on as well that has come as a result of the election, which I just don't see why the Democratic Party would lean this way, is that I've seen so many political analysts, so many on the news, people on CNN and MSNBC that are blaming Latino men for the loss in the election. Yes, so many of them shifted over and voted Donald Trump. But what I've heard them say now is, oh, that is cultural sexism that they couldn't see a woman president. And the machismo of the Latino male is what has led them to go to the other side. And that just seems so anti what the Democratic Party stands for
Yeah.
that it's almost insulting.
Yeah.
It, you can't go from saying, "Hey, this guy's racist because of his immigration policies and because of his the joke that was made on his rally and all this stuff," but as soon as you lose, it's your fault for enshrined cultural sexism.
Yeah.
By the way, let us add that Mexico currently has a sitting woman president, which wasn't elected by Canadians; she was elected by Mexicans.
Yeah.
Um, so maybe it's not that she was a woman; maybe it's her lack of policy.
Yeah. I think it's a really cheap kind of scapegoat response to something like
Yes.
that happening. It's like you don't know where to point, so you point to something where you're villainizing the people that you're trying so hard to get
It's
like the
that
base from.
lack of accountability that they have,
Yeah.
where we've lost, and we didn't just lose, we got destroyed. He
Mhm.
blew us out at the electoral college, blew us out of the popular vote. We don't go and look in the mirror, see what I did wrong. Your knee-jerk reaction is, let me blame the electorate.
Yeah.
And then you wonder why they've abandoned you.
Hmm.
You wonder why these people don't vote for you, because you can't realize that you're being inept. It's obviously the fault of the voters.
Yeah.
Which this isn't a new phenomenon for the Democratic Party. I remember when Hillary lost, they were saying, "Oh, people just didn't go out and vote enough. It was we need people to go and vote." Give
Yeah.
them a reason to. I promise if Bernie Sanders had the ticket, people would go out there and vote for Medicare for all. People would go out there and vote for parental and sick leave. People would go out there and vote for the reduction in student loan debt. People would go out and vote because he has policies that are being supported by
More
bipartisan.
than half of
Yeah.
people. Yeah.
Bipartisan. Both sides of the aisle, the people support Bernie Sanders' policies.
Yeah.
It's insane. And that scares me going forward, because I don't know what are they going to do now. What is the response to this then? If you're already blaming the electorate for the shortcomings of the campaign, does that mean that you're not learning the lesson, like Bernie said, that we have to move more into that populist left? They're just going to move more central,
Yeah.
more central, and thinking, Trump won because he's radically right. Maybe we should start inching more right. Is that should start being harder on immigration? We should start um, being harder on healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. It seems like that's going to be the direction the Democratic goes on now. And what are they going to do? This comes up. Are we sending Kamala Harris out there again in 2028?
Yeah, I don't think that would like work at all.
And it seems like she's already positioned herself to be that person. During her concession speech, she starts positioning herself as this like leader of the resistance against Donald Trump. And she goes out there, she's not being voted for again.
Yeah. I would be interested in like if this were reset from the beginning, she was appointed rather than elected. I would be curious to see. I mean, which originally she didn't even go that far,
she did
in the last
in
one.
2020 when she was in the Democratic primary, she was losing hard. After she wasn't just a quick rundown of how her campaign went in 2020 trying to gain the nomination. They asked her about marijuana and her track record on it while being the DA in California and how she was putting people in jail for that, and then was asked if she ever did it, and she laughed.
Yeah.
Tulsi Gabbard completely destroyed her on the stage when they asked her about Andrew Yang's policy about universal basic income. She said she's only worried about serious candidates, despite Andrew Yang performing better than her on the polls.
Yeah.
Then she loses her home state of California and shortly after drops out. That is not the campaign of a successful politician.
No, and especially with what just happened as well. I think that that's beyond telling. And I mean, if she really thinks that she would have another shot, it just doesn't seem realistic.
There seems to be turmoil within the party already, with Nancy Pelosi recently coming out with some statements saying that she had hoped that Biden had dropped out earlier so they could have ran a primary. They wanted to do a primary. It seems that Joe Biden's last middle finger to them, because they forced him out, was I'm gonna drop out, but in the same sentence I'm gonna endorse Kamala as the next nominee, which kind of leaves the Democratic Party in no place to argue, because if the sitting president said so, causing turmoil in the middle of a election process, you're kind of done.
That makes sense.
They didn't want that, nor did Obama. None of these people wanted her. They wanted to run a primary, and from all the whispers and stuff that are coming out is that they wanted Gavin Newsom to get that nomination, which wouldn't have worked out either. But like, let's look at the state of California.
Yeah, the drug rates,
drugs,
homelessness,
taxes. It's
people are leaving there in flocks.
So much.
Yeah,
so much. Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, Ben Shapiro, Patrick Bet-David, all these different people are fleeing California because the promise of the Democratic Party is we'll raise your taxes. That's not a secret. Taxes will go up under a Democratic administration.
Yeah.
But we're going to use those taxes to better the infrastructure of the country, and we're going to fix all these problems that we're having. But we're seeing California with these ridiculous tax percentages on people's income.
Yeah.
Yet they have some of the worst homelessness in the country.
100%. Those homeless tents, like
there's
cities.
10 cities in California. It's not safe.
Yeah.
Crime, all of this. We're seeing this all across the board. It's moving away just to our neighbors up north. Justin Trudeau, who was great with we want open borders and that's our stance, has been reeling that back a little bit. Justin Trudeau has started saying that immigration needs to stop in Canada because of how bad it's getting. So regardless of them wanting that open primary, I don't think Gavin Newsom would have been much of a different result.
Yeah.
Who else is left? Pete Buttigieg, I don't think will win an election. Andy Beshear won't win an election. Josh Shapiro.
Yeah, one of the bigger names that I've been seeing is people wanting to advocate for like Michelle Obama, but like
I don't think she'd win an election. There's no real political background there.
Yeah.
She's just first lady.
Yeah.
And something that Crystal Ball from over at Breaking Points and Crystal Kyle and friends has said is that she doesn't think the Democratic Party is running a woman for nomination in a long time. And I think she might be right. They ran Hillary and she lost. They ran Kamala and she lost. And for I don't think it's the answer to say, oh, because these two lost, we're not running women anymore. But it seems that that's going to be the direction the Democratic Party goes because, again, they're unable to actually look at the real problem. They think, oh, we lost because America doesn't want to vote for a woman. No, you lost because America doesn't want to vote for puppet politicians with no policy.
Yeah.
Um, but going forward, I think that that's something that they're going to lean into. Oh, we need to put up another Joe Biden,
Yeah. I think
which
they tried really hard to win with identity politics.
they did.
And I mean, as I'm sure anyone watching this could agree that the media as of late, games, movies, shows have been flooded with like
Identity.
identity exactly, the whole woke movement
Yeah,
and empowerment and things of that nature. I think that like it's had a way of that's something that they've been pushing really hard, and you could see it everywhere. And I guess it didn't work,
it didn't,
so.
and we saw that with Kamala's campaign. They tried to reel that back whenever she was asked about her race because Donald Trump was um, questioning her status as an African American woman.
Yeah.
Every time they asked her about that, she kind of just brushed it off and said, "I'm here to represent the people." They didn't. She didn't really make a comment. Like Hillary went hard at being the first female president. That was a big part of Hillary's campaign.
Mm.
We didn't hear that much with Kamala.
Yeah.
And I think that was a result of them seeing that the people were losing that support for what the right calls woke.
Yeah, something that I was surprised about though was what was it about like middle-aged women, white
Middle-aged
women.
suburban white
Yeah,
women.
I think from at least people are in our age demographic, women were really afraid of Trump reclaiming office, and I think a big reason I saw people flocking to Kamala was because of um, having free choice regarding abortion.
Yeah.
And Trump he's been a little bit elusive with his stance on that. I
Yeah,
mean,
I think he was a lot stronger before on the idea that he's against it completely. I remember that commercial, that campaign commercial that he had that I ran on overturning Roe v. Wade, and I did it.
mm,
Um, but since then, this election cycle, he and JD Vance have kind of reeled that back because JD Vance is another one who's a very strong Christian that was heavily against it completely.
yeah,
But they've both kind of reeled that back. I think noticing that that's not what the people would have voted for, they both reeled it back and said our stance is that it's up to the states.
yeah, yeah. And Florida didn't pass. It was what
57.
57 to yeah,
Yeah,
and
they needed 60 to pass it.
yeah,
I think speaking about that in particular, I don't know what happens next with all of these different things. What happens with the climate? What happens with abortion? What happens with gun laws, etc. Because we've been talking about, he won the presidential election. They've won the Senate 53-46. They're right there at winning the House at 212 to 201. You need 218 to have majority in the House.
yeah,
It'll happen.
yeah.
So it looks like they're going to be controlling every branch. What happens with policies for these next 4 years, or at least the next 2 years till the next midterm elections?
Yeah.
What happens?
Yeah, I hope. I would say in many ways I'm definitely progressive. Where I hope drug use like marijuana, for instance, I'm an advocate for the safe recreational use of that, and for women to have their choice. I'm pro-choice. I hope that some of these things, gun laws too. I just hope that more background checks happen because we've this year with like mass shootings has not been good in America.
I think we need to focus more on mental health
Absolutely.
rather than restricting guns. I think the answer to fixing our issue with um, mass shootings is focusing on the mental health of our country because we have some of the worst mental health rates in the world.
Yeah.
I forget if it's happiness exactly what they call it, but there's a rating out there that um, puts into numbers the happiness of countries, and we rank towards the bottom.
Yeah.
That's what I think is fueling these issues of gun violence. I don't
Absolutely.
think it's the guns themselves; it's the mental state of the country. Because um, I don't. Guns have been a thing in the United States for a very long time, and the uptick in violence has started now, and I think it's in correlation with our decline in mental health.
Absolutely, I agree. If we look at the demographic of the people that have been committing these, mass shootings, the school shootings, they're, white, males. And if we're looking at there is a mental epidemic affecting these young men right now
Yeah,
regarding,
what is it called? The lonely man phenomenon,
yeah,
where men are becoming more lonely, more secluded, as what, like we were saying earlier, that more left-leaning ideology pushes them aside and makes them auxiliary to the rest of society almost. And when you isolate people like that, we have these occurrences of lashing out. And I think that's what we need to focus to lower our rates with all these shootings is mental health. As for all the other things you listed, I agree. Like I said at the beginning of the episode, I consider myself to be an independent that is socially liberal but economically conservative. Um, I think, yeah, we need to find a way to codify Roe v. Wade, but I don't see that happening with this administration.
yeah,
Um, we need to find a way with healthcare. Student loans are a problem. All these things are big issues that I don't think are going to be addressed. The climate is a huge one that he's already said he doesn't really think is real.
yeah. That's something I think one of the bigger things that I've been pretty nervous about, where he's kind of just established that he believes it's a hoax devised by China, and collectively the entire world's scientific community has argued against that it is a
Yeah,
very real phenomena,
at
and
least to
it's
some degree, that's what every scientific uh, study has shown, that to some degree human activity is 100% contributing
yeah,
to the climate and our global warming issue.
absolutely. And I hope that enough gets done to help us reverse a lot of the damage that we're creating. um, I'm
Yeah,
not sure that that's going to happen under his administration. I hope, but he seems very. He changed some law, I think, that was implemented recently about like electric vehicles. Do you know about that one?
I'm not sure. No,
Okay, I think he tried to like overturn something, or wants to overturn some mandate on electric vehicles that was like established, I believe.
I'm not
I could
sure.
be misspeaking, but I saw something recently all along those lines,
Okay.
and it does fit his I guess disposition
Well,
towards that.
if it's like I said, I haven't heard about this in specific, but the way you're saying it, a mandate on electric vehicles, like people would have to be driving electric vehicles.
I'm not sure. I definitely need to look more into it,
Because
but
if that's the case, then we have to talk about the issue of affordability. Not everybody
yeah,
can be out here driving a Tesla.
100%, 100%.
So, yeah, I think touching on some of the policies that Kamala had actually proposed during her campaign, we're talking the 6,000 child tax credit, the $25,000 assistance for home buyers, first time home buyers. All of that sounds nice, but
Definitely,
like I said at the beginning, it seems like the Democratic Party has become the party of false promises.
yeah,
You say these things, but I heard um, Joe Biden say that he was going to help with Medicare and healthcare in general. I heard Hillary make promises. I heard Obama make promises that just weren't kept. And I think those pretty words of the child tax credit and the help and assistance for home buyers was just words that fell on deaf ears of people who didn't believe them anymore.
yeah,
Um, but that's just our small takeaway on uh, the political world right now after the election. Uh, just an attempt at people that don't really dive too much into politics on a regular, but obviously with the presidential election, it's something that we need to
yeah.
be cognizant of at the very least.
Definitely, and it's going to affect our lives pretty intensely, for the next while. So
Yeah,
it's important to just look at these issues, and just happenings, and see the ways in which they're going to change your life.
definitely. And I think that's just our small take on it. We
For sure.
don't have political affiliation to either of the two
No.
candidates, really.
Mm.
We don't, we just kind of want to have that regular person point of view to
Yeah.
politics that I think is lost in a lot of political commentary.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking for myself, I hope that a lot of other people feel that same way.
Yeah.
Where I think that a lot of people with intentionality go to look for figures that are on one side or another, and we would like to just offer that space where more middle leaning between, I guess, the respective parties, and acknowledge legitimacies on either end,
Yeah,
and
just
what's wrong with either
essentially
end too.
exploring the grays that really exist in the world as
Yeah,
opposed to trying to always operate within the black and white.
definitely.
Um, but that'll be the end of this episode. And I think, like we said, we're going to try to be doing this going forward with topics that we think are important and worthwhile to talk about that are going on. We'll do some intermediate episodes between our main line episodes of the podcast. Um, if there's anything specific that you guys want us to talk about that you just happened, leave a comment and we'd be more than happy to talk about it.
Absolutely.
We'll see you guys Sunday for the regular episode, which are we going to say what it is?
Masculinity.
Yes, it's masculinity. So we're going to be diving into the ways that masculinity has changed and the views on masculinity and where that's leaving young males. So we'll see you for that one. Thank you. Goodbye.
Have a great day.